All right, I'm going to finish this section 2 of the book. I see Satan fall. I see lightning. I see Satan fall like lightning. I think I know the title by now. We're in the last chapter of the second part of the book, and then we'll be starting into the third section of the book, which is entitled "The Victory of the Cross." So this last chapter is 3 pages, so I figured I'd have my little helper here. And we'll just go ahead and finish out this section here. All right. So powers and principalities. This preceding chapter has shown us that the Bible and the Gospels essentially agree with foundational myths that the cumulative effects of the single victim mechanism and sacrificial rituals are responsible for the foundation and development of human societies. Christians heartily distrusted the sovereign states in which Christianity emerged and spread on account of the violent origin of these states. In naming them Christianity, did not resort to their usual names such as Roman Empire or the Herodic Tetrarchy. Instead, the New Testament usually calls upon a special vocabulary, that of principalities and powers. If we examine the Gospel and New Testament passages that speak of the powers, we confirm that implicitly or explicitly they are associated with the type of collective violence on which I have insisted. This association makes perfect sense if my thesis is right. This violence is the founding mechanism of sovereign states. In chapter 4 of the Acts of the Apostles, Peter applies a line from the 2nd Psalm to the Passion of Christ. The king of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. We don't have to conclude from this quotation that Peter takes literally the participation of all the kings of the earth in the crucifixion. He knows perfectly well that the passion of Jesus didn't attract the attention of the entire world. He does not exaggerate the strictly historical importance of this event. What the quotation means is that beyond an incident certainly minor from Rome's standpoint, Peter finds a special connection between the cross and the powers, and generally because the powers are rooted in collective murders similar to what befell Jesus. Though not identical with Satan, the powers are all his tribulations because they are all servants of the false gods that are the offspring of Satan, that is, the offspring of the founding murder. So here it is not a matter of religion for the individual or belief in a purely individual sense, or as modern people tend to hold. What we're talking about here is rather the social phenomenon that the founding murder created. The system of power Satan has engendered is a concrete phenomenon, material and simultaneously spiritual, religious in a very special sense, efficacious and illusory at the same time. It is religion as illusion, which protects humans from violence and chaos by means of sacrificial rituals. Although this system is grounded in an illusion, its action in the world is real to the extent that idolatry or false transcendence commands obedience. It is striking how many names the New Testament writers invent to designate these ambitious entities. They may be called powers of this world, then on the other hand, celestial powers, as well as sovereignties, thrones, dominions, princes of the kingdom of the air, elements of the world, archons, kings, princes of this world, etc. Why such a vast vocabulary made up apparently of such dissimilar elements? When we examine these titles, we quickly confirm that they divide into 2 groups. Expressions like powers of this world, kings of the earth, principalities, etc., assert that earthly characters of the powers, their concrete reality here below in our world. On the other hand, expressions like princes of the kingdom of the air, celestial powers, emphasize the extraterrestrial, spiritual nature of these entities. What's up, buddy? You sick of daddy's bloviating here? Okay, hold on. All right, let me go back a little bit here. Why such a vast vocabulary made up apparently of such dissimilar elements? When we examine these titles, we quickly confirm that they divide into 2 groups. Expressions like powers of this world, kings of the earth, principalities, etc., assert the earthly character of the powers, their concrete reality here below in our world. On the other hand, expressions like princes of the kingdom of the air, celestial powers, etc., emphasize the extraterrestrial, spiritual nature of these entities. We are talking about the same entities in both instances. The powers called celestial are no different at all from powers of this world. But then why are the two groups of names? It is because the New Testament writers don't know exactly what they mean. Is it because the New Testament writers don't know exactly what they mean? No, to the contrary, they are well aware. I think that they oscillate between the two sets of terms. The New Testament authors have an acute awareness of the twofold ambiguous nature of these powers. What they seek to clarify is the combination of material power and spiritual power that is sovereign reality stemming from collective founding murders. The New Testament writers would like to name this complex reality as economically as possible. And the reason why they multiply this formula is, I think, because the results they obtain do not satisfy them. On the one hand, to say of the powers that they are worldly would be to dwell on their concrete reality in this world, which is an essential dimension, but the detriment of the other dimension, the religious one. Although the latter is illusory, it has effects too real to be conjured away. On the other hand, to say that of the powers that they are celestial is to insist on their religious dimension, namely on the prestige that thrones and sovereigns enjoy among humankind, and that is always perceived as a little supernatural. We see this even now in the todayism that bows and scurries at the feet of our governments, no matter how unimpressive the latter are. The second set of terms inevitably conceals out everything the first set brings out, and vice versa. How can one define in one word the paradox of organizations or institutions that are very real but rooted in transcendence, that is unreal and yet effective? If the powers have many names, it is because of this paradox that constitutes them. It initially If the powers have many names, it is because of this paradox that constitutes them, an internal duality that human language cannot express in a simple, straightforward fashion. Human language has never assimilated what the New Testament is talking about here. It does not command the necessary resources to express the power of bringing people together that false transcendence possesses in the real material world, in spite of its falsity and imaginary nature. Modern readers don't understand the problem the New Testament authors encounter, and so they gladly read into the theme of the powers all the elements of superstition and magical thought that they wish to find in the Gospels. The powers, though always associated with Satan and based on the transcendence of Satan, are not satanic in the same sense as he is, even though they are his tributaries. Sacrificial rituals do not seek to become one with false transcendence. They do not aspire to mystical union with Satan. To the contrary, they try to keep this formidable figure at a distance and hold him at bay outside the community. We cannot call the powers simply diabolical, and we should not, under the pretext that they are evil, systematically disobey them. In this, it is the transcendence on which they are based that is diabolical. The powers are never strangers to Satan, it's true, but we cannot condemn them blindly. Moreover, in a world that is alien to the kingdom of God, they are indispensable to the maintenance of order, which explains the attitude of the church toward them. St. Paul says that the powers exist, they have a role to play as authorized by God. The apostle is too realistic to go off to war against the powers. He recommends that Christians respect them and even honor them as long as they require nothing contrary to the Christian faith. The Roman Empire is a power, even the supreme power in the world where Christianity appears. It must therefore rest upon a founding murder or a collective murder similar to the Passion, a kind of lynching. At first glance, this thesis appears improbable, absurd. The argument goes that the empire had its beginning too recently and artificially to connect it to the event so primitive as our founding murder. And yet we know the historical developments fairly well that resulted in the basis of the Roman Empire, and we can only confirm that they coincide admirably with the concept of this founding basis that we find in the Gospels. The successive emperors draw their authority from the sacrificial power that emanates from the deity whose name they bear. The first Caesar, who was assassinated by numerous murderers. So like every sacred monarchy, the empire is based upon a collective victim who is divinized. There is something about this so striking, so impressive, that it is impossible to see as pure and simple coincidence. Shakespeare, who was extremely perceptive in such matters, refused to do so. Shakespeare does not minimize this founding fact. He has an acute awareness of mimetic process and how they are resolved, and he is an incomparable reader of the Bible. So rather than viewing the reference to Caesar's divinity as mediocre political propaganda, as so many modern historians do, the dramatist centered his tragedy of Caesar in the murder of the hero and defined quite explicitly the founding sacrificial virtues of an event that he both connected and opposed to its counterpart in the distant past, the violent expulsion of the last king of Rome. One of the most revealing passages is the interpretation of the sinister dream Caesar's wife has the night before his assassination. The interpreter clearly announces the founding character, or rather the refounding character of this event. Quote, "It was a vision fair and fortunate. Your statue spouting blood in many pipes, in which so many smiling Romans bathed, signifies that from you great Rome shall suck reviving blood, and that great men shall press for tinctures, stains, relics, and cognizance. The cult of the emperor explicitly reassumes the primitive scheme of the founding murder. This imperial doctrine certainly comes late in history and is too self-conscious not to include a bit of artificial, but those who conceived it clearly knew what they were doing. They were quite successful, as the long life of the Roman Empire has proved. We can better understand the New Testament idea of the powers if we relate it to what is still, in my view, the best of the anthropological theories of social life. Emile Durkheim's concept of social transcendence. The great sociologist found in primitive societies a fusion of the sacred and the social that comes quite close to the basic paradox of the powers and principalities. The union of these two words, social and transcendence, has been much criticized. Minds possessed by the spirit of exact science see in them betrayal of science the benefit of religion, while religious minds see the contrary, a betrayal of religion to the benefit of science. Before criticizing Durkheim, we should first try to understand the effort of a thinker like him who seeks to bypass the abstractions of theorists of his time and ours. He did what he could to gain access to the problem in sociology posed by the juxtaposition of the real immanence, a force arising within the social order itself, and a transcendental power. Although it has its roots in deception, the false transcendence of violent religion is effective as long as all the members of the community respect and obey it. No doubt my thesis is closely related to Durkheim's concept, but I think it is going too far to define my argument as Durkheimian. In Durkheim, we find neither the mimetic cycle nor the single victim mechanism. And above all, we do not find there the question I will now address, that of the insurmountable difference between primitive religions on the one hand and Judaism and Christianity on the other. So that will end part 2 of this excellent book. Part 3 is entitled The Victory of the Cross. Chapter 9 is the uniqueness of the Bible, and that's where we'll begin next time. Thanks for listening.